It's time for another edition of Harvey's Hot Takes with Bryan Hayes, host of Overdrive on TSN Radio in Toronto. And Bryan, we're going to talk about the Atlantic Division and how hot the top three teams are. But first, it looks like Matthew Tkachuk's regular season is over. And now the Panthers can do what the Lightning did with Nikita Kucherov just a few years ago and what the Golden Knights did with Mark Stone. And as you know, that is pushing his salary to long-term injured reserve, and that would give him about $8 million in cap space to make a big move. It's completely within the rules, but it feels really greasy when you see it from the other team's point of view. Are you suspicious at all about this move by the Panthers?
I'm always suspicious about any moves like this. Absolutely, Jen. But I would say don't hate the player, hate the game, right? Don't hate the player, hate the game. You referenced other examples of this. Nikita Kucherov in Tampa, Mark Stone in Vegas, Patrick Kane at one point in Chicago. And what all of those teams had in common is that they had already won Stanley Cups, so they were playing with house money. And I have no doubt that Matthew Tkachuk is injured. We saw that at the Four Nations. He barely played in the final. He didn't play the final game of the group stage. He didn't play in the second half of that great game on Saturday night at the Bell Center against Canada. He is undoubtedly injured. But I think the luxury that you have here, if you can call it that, from a regular season standpoint, is Florida, Tampa, Vegas, Chicago. They probably looked at it and said, if you're going to return with like 3 games left, 5 games left, what's the point? Why don't we stuff you on long-term IR, take the cap money, and utilize it leading up to the trade deadline? And I'm certain that Florida will make more moves. They already acquired Seth Jones, and I'm sure they're going to make more moves. And Paul Maurice was just on radio down in Florida last week, emphatically saying Matthew Tkachuk will play for the Panthers again this year. And now Bill Zito, the GM's like, well, we hope he returns for game 1. It's all about the long-term IR gymnastics. But again, don't hate the player, hate the game. My guess would be Matthew Tkachuk is leading the charge come game 1, and he's flying, right? He's out there flying. He's aggressive. He's leading in the forecheck. He scrums. He's maybe dropping the gloves and fighting. But this is the reality of the long-term IR. This is the reality of the restrictive nature of a salary cap. And Tampa got around it. Vegas got around it. Chicago got around it. And I think Florida's going to get around it. Yes, the other teams are going to hate on it. But as you said off the top, Jen, it is within the rules. I think it's something that the league will have to address at some point down the road. But as of today, that's not the Florida Panthers issue, and it's not Matthew Tkachuk's issue. So as I've said multiple times here, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Okay, well, how about this situation then going on in Edmonton? Because it's kind of the reverse of it in that Evander Kane has been on LTIR, and the Oilers would like to use his cap space to make some deadline moves. However, Kane's been skating. He might make his return before the end of the regular season, which would be the absolute opposite of what we've been talking about. So now speculation has Edmonton maybe looking to move him instead of letting him return before the end of the regular season. So where do you fall on this issue?
Yeah, this is really sticky. This is a really sticky one for Edmonton and Evander Kane. This is where I feel like you need some diplomacy here. This is where Stan Bowman needs to really earn his money and get to Evander Kane and say, please, please stay on long-term IR until game 1. And we will trust you. We will play you. We will give you that opportunity. But I understand where Kane's coming from here, too, because he hasn't played all year. And he's a veteran, and he's under contract. And he's probably thinking, I want to get in the lineup and help this team because Edmonton's not playing that well right now. And I think the conundrum that Edmonton has is that I think they could really use Evander Kane. I think they might need Evander Kane because you look at the offseason additions they made last year, they simply haven't worked. Victor Arvidsson hasn't worked, and Jeff Skinner certainly hasn't worked. And you look at other guys, carryovers from the stretch run last year, like Adam Henrique, hasn't worked. And you got a guy in Corey Perry who will be 40 in a month, who's really their energy guy right now. He's their aggressor. He's the guy out there that's leading the charge and dropping the gloves at times. And I think they need a secondary element to that, and that would be Evander Kane. And that's why I'll believe it when I see it that they move off him, that they're going to trade him. I feel like there's some bluffing going on here, trying to push Evander Kane into a scenario where he will do what other players have done in the past and kind of take a seat until the playoffs. But it's a very sticky one because of the nature of the cap and, again, how much money he's still owed and what maybe Edmonton feels they need to do to add. But if I'm the Oilers, I'm being very cautious here because I think they need Evander Kane. And I know it's delicate because he hasn't played all year. You don't know exactly what you're getting. But that's probably why he's sitting there saying, you got to play me. Let me get 8 to 10 games in so that I can be ready come playoff time, because he's the definition of a playoff player. And I think if he is at 100%, it really, really would help Edmonton, and I think they need the help. So I think in the end, this is a game of chicken again. If I'm Stan Bowman and company in the front office, I'm pushing for that game one, come out like a rocket. But if Kane is adamant that he wants to play and he's going to play, I'd keep him, and I'd give him the opportunity to get in there, and I just hope that he's at 100%, because if he is, he's a really impactful playoff player.
The Leafs were on the ice Monday night, lost to the Sharks in a shootout. As well, the Panthers beat the Lightning in regulation. So here's an updated look at the Atlantic Division standings. Hazy B, how confident are you right now, level of concern, that the Toronto Maple Leafs could beat either the Panthers or the Bolts in a playoff series?
I will play level of concern using overdrive vernacular here. Somewhere like Rick Bush with Stevie Caldwell. I'll go Stevie Caldwell, who once famously said, yeah, just going out for a couple of pints and a few whiskeys, as if that's nothing. But for Stevie, I think it is. But yeah, I'd say mediocre levels of concern, because, you know, you're paying respect to Florida and Tampa. They're great teams. They really are. And the Leafs are a very good team as well. But it is going to be a challenge if you run into one of those two teams. And there's still a possibility that you'd start on the road, right? You just saw the standings there between Toronto, Florida, and Tampa. That's your 1, 2, 3 in the Atlantic. But I have no idea where it currently stands in terms of how it's going to ultimately finish and who's going to end up in the 1 and the 2 and the 3 seed. So I think history would tell you, you lean Tampa, you lean Florida because of the way they're built and because they've won before. So it's like 55-45 in favor of the Florida teams, maybe 60-40 in favor of the Florida teams. And that's why it's imperative that the Leafs take advantage of this race and actually win the division, something they never do. They literally, it never happens. They did it that one year in the All-Canadian COVID year. Then they did it in 99, 2000. And I think prior to that, I'm not sure they've won their division since like the 30s. Like, it's never something they do. And they run into these juggernaut teams every single year. And Leaf fans are constantly reveling in that, oh, they ran into the future, cup finalists like Florida a couple of years ago, like Tampa in the past, like Boston in 2019, like the Habs in 2021. Montreal technically did get to the cup final that year after they stormed back down 3-1 to the Leafs back in 2021. So I think it's imperative, because in past years it's been out of reach, right? Last year was Florida and Boston jockeying for position. The year before that it was Boston, obviously, with that historical year. The year before that, it was Florida. The Leafs have never really been in a position this late into the year to pounce. And, throwing away a point like they did on Monday night against San Jose can really burn you. You're up 2-0 against the worst team in the league and you lose in a shootout. That point is important. Every point is imperative. And they've got a bunch of road games, but they've been playing great on the road lately. And again, their schedule, for the most part, is somewhat soft. And they got games coming up against Florida and Tampa, and that's probably going to be the determining factor. But it's going to be huge, Jen, if the Leafs can find a way to get that 1 seed, because of what you asked me, right? At best, you're hoping for a coin flip against Florida or against Tampa. But if you can find a way to play Columbus or Ottawa or Detroit or even the Rangers, the Leafs would absolutely be in the driver's seat. They'd have home ice. They'd be the better team. And hopefully for Leaf fans, they finally take advantage of it. So do whatever you can to avoid Florida, right? The state of Florida has been in the Cup final 5 straight years. They might do it again. It's tough to bet against them. So if you're the Leafs, take advantage, find a way to get that 1 seed. Do not load manage down the stretch. I think it's got to be the top priority that they find a way to avoid those two teams.
Hayes, Leafs have 21 games remaining. As you mentioned, 3 of them are against the Panthers, and there's 1 against the Lightning. So we're going to get a preview before the season ends. Harvey's Hot Takes. Hazy B bringing it. I love it. Thank you.
Hot Takes is presented by Harvey's. Customize your burger and get it delivered from our app to your door. Harvey's, it's a beautiful thing.